My grandfather built his bakery with his own two hands, and when he died, he left it to me. But my brother told everyone I was too emotional to run it. Then he found out what Grandpa had hidden in the back office, and so did the judge. The smell of bread is the first thing I remember. Not my mother's perfume or the particular creak of our front porch steps, but the warm, yeasty cloud that hit you the second you walk through the back door of my grandfather's bakery on Elm Street in Clover Falls, Ohio. I spent every Saturday of my childhood there, learning to braid challah at age 7, burning my first batch of snickerdoodles at 9, and sitting on a flour sack at 12 while my grandfather, a quiet barrel-chested man everyone in town called Pop, told me that a good baker doesn't rush. You wait for the dough, he'd say. The dough doesn't wait for you. He passed on a Tuesday in late October, 6 months ago now. A heart attack, quick and unexpected. The way people always say is a blessing but never actually feels like one. I was sitting in my cubicle at the county assessor's office, where I work as a property record specialist, when my phone rang. I was the one who drove to the hospital. I was the one who sat with him those last few hours. I was the one who held his hand. My brother was at a conference in Phoenix. He sent flowers. Pop's will was read 3 weeks later in the small office of his attorney, a decent man named Mr. Adler who had been handling our family's legal documents since before I was born. I sat on one side of the table with my husband, and my brother sat on the other with his wife. There was no drama going in. I already knew what the will said because Pop had talked to me about it. He'd always been plain-spoken about his wishes. The bakery, the building, the equipment, the recipe binders, the long-standing wholesale contract with 2 local grocery chains was left to me. His personal savings account went to my brother. A small investment portfolio was to be split equally between us. The house would be sold and proceeds divided. Mr. Adler read it cleanly and calmly. I watched my brother's jaw go tight when he got to the bakery part. His wife reached over and put her hand on his arm. He shook it off, just slightly, and smiled the smile he always uses when he's deciding how to manage a situation. Well, he said, leaning back in his chair, we should talk about what makes the most practical sense here. I looked at him. The will seems pretty clear. Sure, he said, waving a hand. But Pop wasn't. I mean, you know how he was near the end. Sentimental. And the bakery is a business asset, not just a sentimental piece of property. Someone needs to run it who understands the financial side. I'm a property records specialist. I deal in legal documentation, title chains, assessment values, and deed transfers every single day. But that's not what I said out loud. What I said was, I grew up in that bakery. Right, he said. And that's sweet. I just think we should make sure we're being practical about this. He used that word, practical. The same way you'd use a scalpel. It was meant to cut something out. I let it go that day. I shouldn't have. The first sign that something was wrong came 11 days after the will reading. When I drove out to the bakery to start taking inventory and planning the transition. I'd been giving myself time to grieve before jumping into logistics. I had a key, the same key Pop had given me when I was 19, on a simple keyring with a small silver rolling pin charm he'd bought at a craft fair. I'd kept it on my main keychain for 9 years. The key didn't work. I stood on the back stoop for a full 30 seconds, jiggling it, trying again, pressing my shoulder against the door the way you do when you know a lock and know its particular stubbornness. But this wasn't stubbornness. The lock had been replaced. Brand new deadbolt, shiny brass, zero give. I walked around to the front. There was a sign taped inside the glass door, hand-lettered on cardstock. Temporarily closed for renovation. Contact for inquiries. And then my brother's cell number. I called him standing on the sidewalk in front of my grandfather's bakery. He picked up on the first ring, which told me he'd been expecting the call. Hey, he said, casual, like we were making plans for dinner. You changed the locks, I said. I had a contractor in to look at the kitchen ventilation. He needed access while I was at work, so I had the locks updated while they were at it. Old ones were basically worn through. You had a contractor in without telling me. It's a building with aging HVAC. It made sense to get someone in sooner rather than later. It's my building, I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, not because I doubted them, but because I'd never had to say them out loud before. Pop left it to me. It's mine. There was a pause. Look, he said, I've been in contact with a commercial real estate broker. Just preliminary conversations. I wanted to get a sense of the property's market value before we make any big decisions. What big decisions? The decision is made. It's in the will. Wills get contested, he said. That happens all the time. And honestly, sis, I think if we sat down and had a real conversation about this, you'd see that selling makes more financials than trying to run a struggling small business. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but my mind had gone very, very still. I am a property records specialist. Do you know what that means, practically speaking? It means I know exactly how to document a chain of title. I know what constitutes evidence of ownership. I know what filings look like when someone is trying to obscure or redirect a property transfer. I know what a red flag looks like in a deed record from 50 yards away. My brother had just handed me a red flag. I went back to my car, pulled out my work notebook. I always have one. It's a professional habit. And I started writing down everything. The date, the time, the new lock, the sign with his phone number, the word renovation, the mention of a real estate broker, the phrase wills get contested. Then I drove to the county courthouse and pulled the deed records for 412 Elm Street, Clover Falls, Ohio. It took me about 4 minutes because I know exactly where to look. What I found stopped me cold. 48 days before my grandfather died, there had been a deed modification filed. A notation regarding an existing lien on the property. The lien was held by a private party, a limited liability company called Elm Street Ventures, LLC. I'd never heard of it. Pop had never mentioned it. The lien was for $87,000. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot for a long time. $87,000. Against a bakery building that was assessed at $220,000, filed 48 days before Pop died, by a company I'd never heard of. I went home and told my husband everything. He's an electrician, practical and steady, and he sat across from me at the kitchen table and listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about him. You need a lawyer, he said when I finished. I know, I said. A good one. How good? I thought about the lien, about my brother's real estate broker, about the word renovation on that hand-lettered sign. The best one we can afford, I said. Her name was Ms. Calloway. She was a small woman in her early 60s with silver hair and reading glasses she wore pushed up on her head until she needed them, at which point she pulled them down in one efficient motion and got to work. Her office had 3 diplomas on the wall and 0 decorative items. I liked her immediately. I laid everything on her desk. The will, the deed modification, my handwritten notes from the day I found the new lock, and a photograph I'd taken of the sign in the bakery window. She read everything without speaking. Then she pulled her glasses down. Your brother is named as beneficiary of your grandfather's personal savings account, she said. Do you know the approximate balance? Pop mentioned once it was around $40,000, but that was a couple years ago. And this LLC, Elm Street Ventures, do you know if your brother has any connection to it? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. She looked at me for a moment over her glasses. You work in property records. Yes, then you already know how to find out. I did. That's exactly what I did next. LLC registration in Ohio is public record. I pulled the incorporation documents for Elm Street Ventures through the Secretary of State's business search portal that same evening, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and my work laptop. The registered agent was a name I didn't recognize. The listed members were obscured behind the LLC structure, which is common and legal. But the registered address for the business was a mailbox service in Columbus. My brother lives in Columbus. It wasn't proof, but it was the shape of something. The next morning, I filed a formal records request for all deed filings associated with 412 Elm Street going back 15 years. As the titled owner, because the will had been executed and the deed transfer was legally pending, I had standing to request these. Within 3 days, I had a full package of documents delivered to my office. The lien was the only anomaly. Everything else was clean. But the lien document itself had something interesting. A notarization stamp from a notary in Columbus dated a Saturday at 9:47 in the morning. My brother had sent me a photo that same Saturday 10 weeks before Pop died. He and his wife at brunch in Columbus. The timestamp on the photo he'd texted me was 11:23 a.m. He had been in Columbus the morning that document was notarized. I brought everything to Miss Calloway. He's going to contest the will, she said after reviewing it. And his strategy will be to argue your grandfather wasn't of sound mind, that the bequest to you was the product of undue influence or confusion. He'll try to get the will invalidated so the bakery falls into the general estate, and then he'll use his role as the named financial beneficiary to argue he should control disposition of assets. He was completely sound, I said. We talked about the bakery right up until a few months before he died. He knew exactly what he wanted. Do you have documentation of that? I thought of Pop's letters. He'd been a letter writer his whole life, even after email became normal. He wrote them by hand on ruled paper and mailed them, and I had saved every single one since I was old enough to have my own address. They were in a shoebox in my closet, organized by year with rubber bands. 41 letters over 18 years. He'd written me one as recently as 7 months before he died, talking about the bakery's new wholesale account, asking if I wanted to come down and help him test a new sourdough formula that weekend. I have letters, I said, a lot of them. Ms. Calloway allowed herself a small, satisfied look. Good, she said, we're going to need them. The official contest arrived in the form of a motion filed by my brother's attorney, a man named Mr. Finch, who I learned through a 5-minute internet search, had handled several commercial property disputes in central Ohio. The motion claimed that our grandfather had shown signs of cognitive decline in his final year, that he had been unduly influenced by his relationship with me, and that the bequest of the bakery was inconsistent with his stated wishes to keep the family together. A phrase that my brother had clearly cherry-picked from some conversation I hadn't been present for. Reading it made me feel sick, and then it made me furious. And then the fury went cold and hard and became something I could work with. Because here's the thing about what my brother did. He walked into a courtroom and put a target on everything. He claimed Pop was vulnerable. He claimed Pop was confused. And that claim, that our grandfather had been financially and cognitively at risk in his final years, opened a door that my brother had not thought through. If Pop was vulnerable, then every financial transaction during his period of vulnerability was subject to scrutiny, including the lien. Miss Calloway filed our counter-motion immediately. We were contesting the contest, countersuing for legal fees. And this was the piece that made my brother's lawyer go quiet in a way I would learn about later. We were formally requesting discovery. Full financial discovery. Every account our grandfather held in the last 10 years. Every transaction over $500. Every document bearing my brother's name or the name of any LLC he was associated with. The hearing before discovery was a cold, fluorescent-lit room in the county courthouse. My brother sat across a table from me for the first time since this had started. He looked like himself, pressed shirt, confident posture, but his eyes moved to Miss Calloway's files and stayed there. Mr. Finch tried to characterize our discovery request as a fishing expedition and a bad faith attempt to harass the petitioner. Miss Calloway didn't bother arguing the characterization. She simply stated calmly that the petitioner had introduced the question of the decedent's financial vulnerability, and that the defense had a right, and in fact, a responsibility, to fully examine the conditions surrounding any financial decisions made during the period of alleged vulnerability. The judge, a woman who looked like she had heard every version of this argument and found all of them tedious, agreed with Ms. Calloway. Discovery is granted, she said. Full financial records, 10-year look-back. I'll expect an update from both parties in 30 days. My brother's confident posture shifted, just slightly. His wife, sitting behind him, glanced at the back of his head with an expression I couldn't read. What the discovery uncovered took my breath away. Not metaphorically. I actually had to sit down when Miss Calloway walked me through it. Pop had maintained 3 accounts, a personal checking account, his personal savings, and a separate small business account, for the bakery's operational expenses. My brother had been added as a secondary account holder on the personal savings account 8 years ago, supposedly to help Pop manage transfers and bill payments as he got older. That part was not surprising. What was surprising was what had happened to that savings account over time. 8 years ago, the balance had been just over $90,000. At the time of Pop's death, the balance was $11,000. $79,000 had left that account over 8 years, in a pattern of transfers that were irregular in size but consistent in destination. A checking account in Columbus, Ohio, registered to my brother. And then there was the lien. Elm Street Ventures, LLC, the entity that held an $87,000 lien against my grandfather's bakery building, was, as Ms. Calloway confirmed through the discovery process, registered to my brother's wife as sole member, with my brother listed as managing agent. He had incorporated it 14 months before Pop died. He had filed the lien 48 days before Pop died. The plan, as best Ms. Calloway could reconstruct it, was straightforward and ugly. My brother had spent years slowly draining my grandfather's savings, transferring money to himself in amounts that were large enough to matter, but small enough to avoid automatic flags. When Pop's health started declining, my brother had filed the lien against the bakery, using his wife's name to create a layer of distance, creating a financial encumbrance on the property. If my brother could get the will invalidated, he would assume control of the estate. He would then argue the lien had to be settled before the property could be transferred. The lien money, $87,000, would go to Elm Street Ventures, which was effectively himself. He would sell the property, collect the lien payout, and walk away. He had done all of this while Pop was alive. While Pop was making him soups when he visited and writing him birthday cards and calling him on Sunday evenings. I sat with that for a long time before I could speak. I finally said, he filed it while Pop was still alive. Pop had to have signed something. Did Pop know? Calloway's expression was careful. There are documents with your grandfather's signature attached to the lien filing. Whether he understood what he was signing, or whether he was told it was something routine, that we may never know for certain. But given his demonstrated cognitive sharpness in other documents from the same period, I think the more likely explanation is that he was misled about what he was authorizing. I thought about Pop at 81, trusting his grandson to hand him papers, to explain what they were. I thought about how you hand someone a pen and say, just sign here, Pop, it's just for the account management, and how a man who built his life on handshakes and honest transactions would have no reason not to believe you. I had to leave Miss Calloway's office and sit in my car for a few minutes. Then I drove home and did not cry until I was inside. And then I cried for a long time. And then I went back to work. There was one more conversation I needed to have before the trial. My sister-in-law had been present for most of this. She'd been at the will reading, she'd been at the preliminary hearing, her name was on the Elm Street Ventures filing, and I had been trying to figure out for weeks how much she actually knew. I found her at her office, a small accounting firm where she works as a bookkeeper. I know, the irony. I didn't call ahead. I walked in and asked the receptionist if she was available for a few minutes. She came out to the lobby, and when she saw me, her face went carefully blank in the way that confirmed she'd been expecting this. "Can we talk?" I said. We went to a conference room. She sat very straight and didn't say anything. I laid the Elm Street Ventures Incorporation document on the table, her name in black and white as sole member. "I didn't set that up," she said immediately. "He asked me to sign some paperwork for a property investment he was looking at. I didn't read everything. You're listed as sole member of an LLC that holds an $87,000 lien against my grandfather's property." She stared at the document. Her face had gone pale. "I didn't know what the lien was for," she said, quieter now. "He said it was a standard business thing. He handles all our financial stuff. I don't. I just sign what he asks me to sign." "That's what you'll have to tell them," I said. "Because this is going to trial, and the discovery is not going to be kind to either of you." I slid another piece of paper across the table. It was Miss Calloway's business card. "You need your own lawyer," I said. "Not his. Your own." Because you are either a victim in this or you are a co-conspirator, and right now you're on paper as the person who set up the entity that filed the lien. You need someone who is working for you specifically. She picked up the card. Her hand was shaking. He told me Pop was getting confused, she said softly. He said Pop was giving things away and not understanding the value of what he had. He said he was protecting the family assets. Pop wasn't confused, I said. He knew exactly what he wanted. He just trusted the wrong person. I stood up. She didn't say anything. She was still looking at Miss Calloway's card. The trial is in 3 weeks, I said. Think about where you want to sit. The courtroom was small and smelled like old carpet and central heating. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Miss Calloway and my binders, 4 of them, color-coded by category, labeled in the neat shorthand I use at work. Pop's letters were in the blue binder, the financial records were in the red one, the LLC incorporation documents and lien filing were in the green. The property deed history was in the black. My brother sat at the opposite table with Mr. Finch. He did not look at me. His wife walked in 5 minutes before the judge entered. She paused in the doorway, looked once at my brother's table, then walked to the gallery and sat down behind me. My brother turned at the sound of her footsteps. He watched her cross to my side of the room. Something moved through his expression, not quite disbelief, more like the specific look of a person watching a structure they built collapse on itself. The judge entered. She had reviewed all the pretrial submissions and said so plainly. Miss Calloway opened by establishing the will. Mr. Adler testified that Pop been clear and specific in his instructions, that he had come to his office twice to discuss the document, that he had asked pointed questions about the language and been satisfied with the answers. Pop's doctor, a quiet man who'd been his physician for 16 years, testified that his cognitive function had been normal, that there was no documented decline, that his last physical 14 months before his death had shown no signs of memory impairment. Then Miss Calloway presented the letters. She read 4 of them aloud. I had not expected that part and had to press my fingers together under the table to stay composed. The letters were just him, his voice, his cadences, his way of circling around to the point with a small story first. The last one she read was from 10 months before he died, describing a Saturday when a little girl had come in with her mother and asked if she could watch him frost a birthday cake. He'd said yes, of course, and spent 20 minutes showing her how to hold the piping bag. He wrote about it like it was one of the best mornings he'd had in years. Then Miss Calloway turned to the financials. She did not rush. She laid it out the way you lay out a long receipt, item by item, date by date, number by number. The transfers from Pop's savings account to my brother's checking account over 8 years, the incorporation of Elm Street Ventures, the filing date of the lien, the dates my brother had been in Columbus when key documents were notarized, my brother's managing agent status on the LLC. Mr. Finch objected several times. The judge overruled him each time. When Miss Calloway slid the summary document across the table toward the judge, a single sheet showing the total, $79,000 in transfers, plus the $87,000 lien. The courtroom was very quiet. The petitioner claimed your grandfather was vulnerable, Miss Calloway said. What the records show is who was actually making him vulnerable and who was benefiting from it. My brother's lawyer asked for a brief recess. The judge gave him 10 minutes. When we came back, the judge looked at Mr. Finch and said, "Does your client have any explanation for the financial presented today?" Mr. Finch said his client would be declining to answer on Fifth Amendment grounds. The judge looked at my brother for a long moment. He was looking at the table. She called my sister-in-law to the stand. My sister-in-law testified quietly and completely. She explained how my brother had presented the LLC paperwork to her as a routine investment vehicle. She said he told her the lien was a formality related to a property management arrangement. She said she did not know. The property in question was her husband's grandfather's bakery. She said she had been handed documents and told where to sign for years, and had trusted that she understood the shape of things even when she didn't know the details. She said she was sorry. She said it more than once. When she stepped down, she did not look at my brother. The judge did not take long. "The petition to contest the will of the deceased is denied," she said. "The will is valid and enforceable as written. The bakery property at 412 Elm Street, including all equipment, contracts, and associated assets, is the sole property of the petitioning party's sister as stipulated." She wasn't done. "I am also voiding the lien filed by Elm Street Ventures, LLC, on the grounds that it was established through fraudulent misrepresentation to the property owner, the deceased, who was induced to sign documents he was not given accurate information." She paused and looked at my brother. "Furthermore, I am awarding the plaintiff full legal fees and punitive damages in the amount of $45,000 for the filing of a frivolous and bad faith petition against a valid will. And then, I am referring the full financial record of this case. Every transfer, every LLC document, every lien filing to the county prosecutor's office for immediate review regarding potential charges of financial elder abuse and fraud." The gavel came down. My brother didn't move for a moment. Then his lawyer touched his arm and said something quietly, and they gathered their papers and walked out. My brother passed within 3 feet of me on his way to the door and did not look at me once. The aftermath moved quickly, the way things do when the structure finally gives. The prosecutor's office opened an investigation within 2 weeks. My brother retained a criminal defense attorney, not Mr. Finch, someone else, someone who specialized in financial crime. My sister-in-law cooperated fully with investigators. The bank records showed a pattern that was, according to the investigator who called to inform me of the case status, not subtle. My brother was placed on administrative leave from his job at the investment firm pending the outcome of the investigation. The lien was formally discharged from the property record. I watched my county colleague process it in our system and felt something in my chest loosen that I hadn't even realized had been clenched for months. I got the keys to the bakery from Mr. Adler's office on a Wednesday afternoon. He'd been holding them since the deed transfer was finalized. He handed them to me across his desk, a simple key ring, 2 keys, no charm, and said, "Your grandfather would be proud." I drove to 412 Elm Street and unlocked the front door with my own key for the first time. The inside smelled stale and cold from months of sitting closed. The display cases were empty. Someone, one of my brother's contractors probably, had pulled up a section of the floor near the register, ostensibly to check something, and left it unfinished. There was a thin layer of dust on the prep tables. I stood in the middle of it for a long time. Then I opened every window I could reach, let the November air move through the room, and started making a list. The first thing on the list was the floor. The second was a deep clean of the entire kitchen. The third was calling the 2 grocery store contacts from Pop's wholesale contract, which had been suspended but not terminated, to tell them the bakery was coming back. The fourth thing on the list was testing Pop's sourdough formula, the one we'd been working on together last spring, the one I had notes on in a small notebook I'd kept in my kitchen drawer since the last time I'd been out to help him. I'd never made it alone. But I knew the steps. He'd walked me through them more than once. "You wait for the dough," he used to say. "The dough doesn't wait for you." My sister-in-law called me once, a couple months later. She'd finalized her divorce filing and was staying temporarily with her sister out of state. She didn't ask for anything. She just said she was sorry. Really sorry. The kind of sorry that sounds like something a person has been carrying around and finally set down. She said she should have asked more questions years ago. She said she didn't know if that was an excuse or just the truth. But it was the truth. I told her I believed her. I told her I hoped things got easier. I meant it. My brother's trial is scheduled for the spring. I don't know yet whether I'll go. What he did, to Pop, to the business Pop spent 40 years building, to the memory of a man who trusted him, there's no courtroom resolution that fully accounts for that. Some debts aren't the kind that get paid. What I do know is that I'm here. On Saturday mornings, I open the bakery at 6, and by 7, the whole block smells like bread. I've hired 2 part-time staff, both of them local kids who needed work. The sourdough is on the menu. It took me 4 batches to get it right, and on the 4th one I stood at the work table at 5 in the morning and tasted it. And it was exactly right. That slight tang, that open crumb, that crust that gave under your thumb and then pushed back. I sat down on the flour sack I keep in the corner, the same way I used to sit as a kid, and I ate a piece of bread with butter, alone in the quiet of the early morning, in my grandfather's bakery that is now mine. The cold weight I'd been carrying since that phone call in October was gone. Not all at once. It had been leaving in pieces, a little every week. But that morning it was just gone, replaced by the smell of bread and the specific satisfaction of a thing done right. Pop always said the bakery was alive, that it breathed, that a bakery without baking in it was just a room. He was right. He usually was.